firstly. I know I've already said it, but thank you so much for attending tonight. I'll just get you all to introduce yourselves, your organisation, and what's brought you here tonight, and perhaps why you're an expert so people can know your credentials. I'll start with you, Jay.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's really great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. My name's Jay Gordon. I'm an analyst with a group called IEFA. That's an acronym that stands for the Institute for Energy Economics. So IEFA stands for the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. We do a lot of work around the energy transition and analysis of different energy sectors of the economy. My work is very much focused on the electricity sector here in Australia, with a particular focus on households and things like energy efficiency and electrification, which we're here to discuss today. My background before that, I used to work with a group called Climate Works Centre, and I was doing quite a lot of modelling of emissions reductions across the economy with that group. One of the things we always found in doing that modelling was that no matter what kind of scenarios you were looking at, one of the most cost-effective ways you can reduce emissions was through electrification, and especially electrification of households is always a very cost-effective opportunity. So there's been, at times, a frustration when you see that electrification hasn't been happening as fast as you might expect. But that's a lot of what I do, is looking at how we can make that happen faster. And there are encouraging signs when we see big wins in that space, as we have. And that's me.
Hi, my name's Kat Lucas-Healy. My job is the Senior Climate and Energy Advisor at Environment Victoria. So we're a not-for-profit group, an environment charity, and part of Geelong Renewables Not Gas. I've been working in energy and sustainability for over 20 years and have a background in building and construction industry, which is also where I did my PhD. I've done research in new energy technologies and worked in policy and now in advocacy with EV, so lots of different stuff there. I think electrification is pretty exciting because it's a pathway that's quite clear, that puts quality of life first, and there's something in it for everyone. There's all the stuff that Jay talked about, where it makes economic sense, but it's really important that wherever we're going, that there's fairly broad agreement on that, and electrification has been, I think, a really shining example of that. There are lots of community groups that have popped up everywhere, all around Victoria, that are just talking about it, offering each other advice and stuff like that. And so I think that's a really interesting and really positive example of change that people can sort of get behind.
Hi everyone, I'm Rory Anderson. I'm Energy and Cost of Living Policy Advisor at VCOS, so that stands for the Victorian Council of Social Service. We're the peak body of all social and community service organisations in Victoria, so big charities, people that provide social work, all sorts of different services. And a lot of my work personally is in the energy space around equitable access to renewable and affordable energy. So I do a lot of work around boring stuff like consumer protections, boring to some. But when it comes to electrification, we're very big supporters of a fast move towards electrification in the home, because as well as it being good for action on climate change, we really do see, as others have pointed out, that if done correctly, it is a way to improve people's material conditions, people's quality of life in their own home, which has all sorts of flow-on effects for people, as well as being good for meeting our emissions reductions targets, which getting off gas is an essential part of. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. My name's Sung Beck. I'm a rural general practitioner. I've been a doctor for almost coming on 14 years and have been working in Colac since about 2020. So I see patients in clinic there and also work at the hospital there in their little emergency department. So see a few different angles of healthcare. I also, in a voluntary capacity, am currently chairing the Victorian branch of Doctors for the Environment Australia. That's an organisation of about a couple of thousand doctors across the country who have come together to focus on the role of the environment in health, because basically without a healthy planet you don't get healthy people. And I guess I'm here tonight because, maybe a bit selfishly, seeing a move towards electrification will actually decrease my workload long term. And we'll get into that, but yeah, that's basically the crux of why I work for DEA, and also why I'm very passionate about this.
Perfect. It sounds like we do have some experts tonight, which is always nice. The questions in this section have all been previously submitted by audience members, so yourselves, during registration. Due to time constraints, I do want to note that not all questions submitted are used, but you will have the opportunity, if your question isn't read out, to ask that again in the audience questions in the second half of tonight. A majority of the questions I read out tonight have been unedited, but I've added context to 2 of them just to help our panellists answer. Each panellist will have 2 to 3 questions to answer, and I'll start with yourself, Jay. My sister made these, so they're pretty good. So Jay, this person owns a 1-bedroom unit. The cost of moving away from gas when I am the only person living here constantly outweighs the advantages. How do I leave my unit better than I bought it and play my part in a sustainable future when this is the reality?
Thanks. Yeah, this is a really good question, because I think it touches on what is, for some people, one of the biggest barriers to electrification, which is the upfront cost. And so, obviously, a really common situation for a lot of homes in Victoria is that you might have, up to 3 gas appliances: a gas heater, a gas hot water system, a gas cooktop. And it's going to be quite overwhelming to think about the process of going through and replacing all those appliances and doing things like replacing your gas meter. So one of the ways I like to think about it is that electrification for an individual household doesn't have to be an everything at once type of situation. In fact, for most households, I expect the way this would happen is a gradual thing over time. And in our work, we see that one of the most critical kind of decision points you might face as a household is the point in time where one of your existing appliances reaches its end of life, so it breaks down, basically. So imagine, one day your gas heater stops working, it can't really be repaired anymore. And this is a point where the majority of people, if we're sort of operating on autopilot, might end up going out and buying the same gas heater and replacing it. But that's a really critical opportunity where we can think about, if we have the means, installing something efficient and electric, because at that point you're not having to think about this as a full cost of a new piece of equipment. That the financial difference is really just how much extra am I paying for the efficient electric appliance compared to the gas appliance. Now, you sort of might see, if you get to a point with the household where you've kind of gone through that stage and replaced, say, your gas heater and your gas hot water system. And another common thing we see is that the last kind of cab off the rank for appliances might be the gas cooktop. And so for a lot of households, if you're in a situation where you might have electrified the other appliance and it's just the cooktop left, you think, well, this isn't actually consuming that much energy, so it might not seem like it's adding that much to my gas bill. But that might be the last appliance that is causing you to have a gas bill in the first place. And so we usually pay something like $200, $300 or more a year in fixed charges in our gas bill. And so that could be an opportunity to think about, well, if I electrify this cooktop, I can avoid those charges in future. So that's kind of how I see the sequencing of electrification. Having said that, I think it is still a really valid point to note that there is an upfront cost involved, and that is going to be a barrier for a lot of households. One thing that we've seen in Victoria that's quite positive is that there are quite a lot of state government incentives that are now quite targeted towards supporting electrification. And so in a lot of cases, from the modelling I've looked at, for a Victorian home, it can actually be cheaper to go out and buy an efficient electric hot water system rather than a gas hot water system, if you can have access to those incentives. So that's something to bear in mind, and most installers of these efficient electric appliances will be fully aware of the incentives on offer, and they'll package that into what they're selling to you. So that's a really big plus. But yeah, the takeaway is, I think, don't think about this as a big thing that you have to go out and make your apartment or your unit perfect. Any little kind of step when you get to those decision points towards electrification is really important. Yeah, that's what I have to say. And I will say, to just add to that, the question was about units. I think it's worth saying that some apartments or some units are going to be harder to electrify than others, like separate homes. And that's something that, we do have to factor in. I think the majority of Victorians live in homes that are relatively easy to electrify. But absolutely, I think the burden of figuring out how to electrify those harder units doesn't necessarily have to rest with the households. I think there is more support that we could see from governments in some of that area.
That's a very good overview. Yeah. So it sounds like, it's a phased approach rather than everything at once. My second question for you is, how can renters take cost advantage of increased solar capacity in the energy system, particularly with regard to moving towards electric vehicles?
Another very excellent question. I guess it's like the context for this in general. And I've done a bit of work recently looking at rental properties, and there are particular, again, barriers for rental properties to be upgraded. So if you're a renter, obviously you don't have the ability to kind of go out and purchase efficient electric appliances or install rooftop solar. It's very likely that your landlord doesn't have much of a motivation to do that because they're not paying the energy bills. So that's what we call the split incentive problem. Once again, with my sort of policy analysis hat on, I think there's a lot more that we can be doing in the policy space to support that. Particularly around minimum rental standards, which thankfully is something that Victoria is starting to lead on. On a more practical level for renters, it's interesting to think about. A thing to think about in Australia is the fact that because we have so much rooftop solar, we really are a world leader in that space. We're actually in a situation where the cost of generating electricity in most days of the year falls to very low or sometimes negative levels during the middle of the day. It's a very interesting situation to be in. Now, most of us on our electricity bill, we're not paying that wholesale market price unless you're on some of the particular plans out there that offer that. But recently we have seen the federal government and also the Victorian government come out with this idea of a solar share offer, which is that if you're an energy retailer, one of your offerings will have to be a plan that gives people free electricity for 3 hours in the middle of the day. Now, there's different views on sort of how effective those plans will be. And of course, I think it's important for people to do their due diligence and know that not everyone will be able to access that. But certainly if you're a renter who has some electric appliances that you're able to shift to the middle of the day, hot water systems are a really great example. They can be put on timers and that's a big part of your energy consumption. That's one way to access the benefits of rooftop solar. But I would personally love to see a bit more action around minimum rental standards and things like renters' right for solar that actually allows more solar systems on the roofs of rental properties.
Nice. And then my final question for you, Jay, is who would be responsible for the removal of gas meter costs?
It's another big question, actually, because the answer is evolving as we speak. To step back again, a little bit of context for this. So if you're a household that's managed to go the whole way and you've replaced all of your gas appliances, you're left with a couple of options. So one is you can go and you can call up your gas retailer and say, I don't need to use gas anymore. Remove me from my plan. You'll stop using gas. Nothing changes on your property. And that's what we might call a temporary disconnection, where you might still have a gas mains and a gas meter on your property. The other option, and this is preferred by the energy safety regulator in Victoria for obvious reasons, is to actually remove the assets that have live gas on your property. So that might mean removing the gas meter and removing some of the mains that connect you to the pipe under the street, and we call that abolishment. So one of the things that can be a bit of a challenge when you go down the full electrification route is paying for that abolishment. Until pretty recently, there wasn't much regulation around that. So you had actually reports of gas networks charging pretty high prices for people wanting to abolish that connection. And if you're the gas network, you don't have much of an incentive to encourage people to get rid of that connection. There was a decision in Victoria made a couple of years ago, which essentially says that if you're on any of the Victorian regulated gas networks, so it covers most of Victoria except some rural regions, the cost is limited to, I think it's less than $250 dollars, which is better than nothing, but it still can be a barrier for some households. The complication is that might be changing a bit federally, so there's a sort of discussion at the federal level to change that rule so that people might actually be having to pay a higher share of that cost. And I could probably talk a long, a long time about the regulatory implications of that and sort of how costs get shared between different customers. But yeah, there is a cost there, and it is borne by the consumer. Again, I'm going to shift a bit to my policy hat of, what's a more ideal situation about how things should be. And there was some interesting work actually published this week by some really great people at Brotherhood of St Lawrence, which was modelling what would it actually look like if, instead of we requiring every individual house to get rid of their gas connection, what if we pruned the gas network? So what if you had a street where most of the houses are electrified, the last few houses are supported to get off gas, and we can actually just cut off that gas main on that street from the rest of the network and move on. In my view, that's by far the most efficient way of doing it and the way I would like to see things go. But certainly it's something we push for, but it is something to be aware of, that there is an upfront cost for gas abolishment at the moment.
Thank you very much for your expertise, Jay. Kat, I want to move to you next. This is actually, I'm not meant to have favourites, but this is my favourite question of the night, so hopefully you can do it justice. This says, doesn't it make sense to have a secure gas supply in Geelong for now until electrification and renewables are in place? I'll pass over to you.
It's a really good question, and it gets asked, I think, in a lot of forms, and I think it kind of boils down to what are we waiting for, really. We have a secure electricity supply today, and our electricity supply is going renewable very quickly in Victoria. Only about 12 years ago, our electricity was 12% renewable. Today, it's getting close to 45%. So that's a really quick change, and it's a massive achievement for Victoria, the brown coal state. And that's going to keep changing. We've got Yallourn, the next coal power station, is due to close in 2 years. If it lasts that long, it's literally falling apart. And we have, in Victoria, we have the cheapest electricity prices in the country, and they've just gone down again. And that is a direct result of the renewable transition, is that it is really starting to pay off. So we've got electricity prices that are actually creeping down. Gas, on the other hand, ever since that, it has been pretty historically plentiful and cheap because of the gas reserves that were discovered in Bass Strait in the 60s, and those are running out now. We also have, about 10 years ago, since gas started being exported from Queensland, our gas prices have tripled since then. And part of the reason is some of the gas that is getting exported from Queensland is Victorian gas, because they agreed to contracts that they couldn't actually supply from Queensland. So we're running out more quickly, and our bills have gone up that much as a direct result of those gas companies and their business decisions. And that's why people are going, they need to be taxed for all the profits that they're making on those exports. We should tax them, and that money should pay for all this difficult stuff. But I'll get back to the question. If the way I see it, and this comes just from sort of speaking with people, and say, you're a pensioner, you have a limited income, you might have some savings. Once they're gone, that sort of thing. Gas is already expensive. It's already expensive to heat your home using gas. You're spending money more and more every year heating your home, and maybe you're heating it a bit less and going a bit cold because it's too expensive now. That money is better spent sooner to go electric if you can, and to get the support you need to do that, so that you can have a warm home, which you need, especially as you're getting older, and have an affordable bill. So it's, I think, the question of what are we waiting for? Like, are we waiting to go broke? And I think one of the important pictures that we also need to think of this is in regional parts of Victoria that don't necessarily have the most reliable electricity supply, and it might be a small area and it doesn't get picked up in the statistics that sort of govern how reliability is accounted for in the system. we need to have more focus on electricity reliability in those areas, because if your power is going off frequently, it's going to feel a lot shakier to go electric. And so that's something that we've started bringing up, and that's something that we've really sort of observed with a bunch. There were 10 towns in Victoria who've recently been told your gas supply is getting cut off, bad luck, which is terrible because they've had no time to plan for that. One of the things that kind of keeps people on gas is they're worried that the power's going to go out. So I think that's the real piece there, and it affects a small number of people, but it affects it's a significant impact on those people. But for the rest of us, it's really a case of, I think, being able to plan, having enough time to, figure out what you want to do, save up for it, go electric how you would like to, and not be told you've got a year, we're cutting off the gas, good luck. Yeah.
I turned it off. Whoops. That's a really good overview. I think that shows that the question isn't it's not an if, it's a when, and how do we do that justly with a just transition. My next question for you is, what does Victoria's actual transition timeline look like? Give me the date.
So we have climate targets, which is we'll get down to effective or net zero by 2045, which is 19 years away. 19 years ago was 2007. I don't know about you, that doesn't feel like very long ago. So we're really in the middle of it now. This is our time to make this change. In terms of our renewable energy targets, so as I said before, we're reaching about 45%, and the next target is 65% in 2030, and then 95% in 2035. So, but the gas transition it becomes a little bit more, how long is a piece of string? So at the moment in Victoria, one of the sort of best indicators we've got at the moment is how many gas connections are not being used. They're dormant. Someone's called up their gas retailer saying, I'm not using gas anymore, can you stop sending me a bill? But they're not taking the steps that Jay was talking about, which is to do something about the meter, have it removed, have it made safe, and that sort of things. And so those dormant connections, at the end of last year, it was about 4.5%. So we're probably about 5% in Victoria, which is, that's 1 in 20. That's quite a bit. In the ACT, where they're a bit ahead of Victoria, they're up to about 13% dormant now. So they've got this problem that they haven't solved yet. But it kind of gives you an indication of how quickly that would happen. In the ACT, they've been told, I can't remember what year it is exactly, it might be about 2035 or something like that, we're turning off the gas. So people have been told, we haven't been told. In the ACT, people are still not really sure what they're supposed to do about that, because people need, this is quite a big deal where, they're shutting off one whole energy source. And so that kind of proper guidance, as well as rules for things like rental homes and new builds and that kind of thing, so you're kind of not just creating a bigger legacy problem that you need to mop up, and money for those who can afford it, paid for by those big gas companies, which would be nice. There's lots of money there. To actually know what to do. So as far as we have those sort of, to answer the question, we have those targets, we know where we're going, but there's still a bit of, okay, cool, I'll just stand here and wait because I don't really know what to do, which is completely normal and expected, I think.
Yeah, okay, good answer. And then my last question for you is, in the context of decarbonisation, does it really make a difference if I electrify my home? What do you think?
I love this question, actually, because it is one that comes up a lot. So if we did a report about 18 months ago where we did the analysis of replacing gas ducted heating with efficient electric heating and cooling, So your home's got a bit more comfortable. We looked at the cost, but we also looked at the emissions. And the emissions saving over the lifetime of the appliance was about a half to 2/3 of the emissions that would have happened. That was 18 months ago. Our grid is that much more renewable now, so it would actually work out better. I think it would very much shift maybe up into the 3/4, and it's only going to get better over time as the grid gets more renewable. And the other thing is as Bass Strait runs out of gas, we don't run out. Like, no government is going to let Victoria run out of gas while we're still using it every day. But we're going to end up with gas imported from overseas or from other parts of Australia, or we're going to end up with gas coming in a pipeline from Queensland. Those shipping emissions and those pipeline leakages emissions are methane. They're very powerful greenhouse gases. So from an emissions perspective, our next sources of gas are much dirtier than Bass Strait. And when you have gas coming from particularly places like the US, like all the gas reserves are different and they have different compositions. There might be a lot of carbon dioxide in the gas, and which has to be removed and goes to the atmosphere as well. So the source of the gas can be much, much dirtier as well. But I think when we think of individual action versus systemic change, what we sort of see, and I kind of touched on this in my very first introduction at the start, was in Victoria, what we've got is lots of community groups, people such as yourselves, getting together, talking about this, saying what you're worried about, what you like, what you don't like, sharing experiences, helping people find the right tradesperson to do things. And we have lots of community groups and charities and that are helping to, providing education about this. We have heaps of installers that are now shifting away from gas work, and they're now always talking about electrification and installing more split systems and stuff like that. So we have this sort of ecosystem that's building up. And all of the people that have already electrified and that are talking about it and are on the My Efficient Electric Home Facebook group and sharing all those stories, these are all parts of how society and technology changed together. And if you have a look at the history of how we switched from different forms of transport over the years, from things like horses and steam trains and vehicles and that kind of thing. This is how change happens. It starts at the grassroots, and what people are doing together is sort of legitimising new technologies. And so if we say it's all up to yourselves, it's individual action, that's it, that's a pretty crap response. But together, if we think of it as systemic change and think about what is needed at this point of time to keep this momentum going and make sure that we're not leaving a tail of people who are just left behind, that's literally how it happens. So it's always both.
So it sounds like, yes, it does have an impact to electrify your home.
It has an impact. It has an impact. And when I talk about it, because I'm just really slack and haven't got around to disconnecting our gas heater yet, and it's just pure inertia. But when I talk about it, people start telling me, oh, I did this, or make sure you get one of those induction cooktop, make sure it's got real buttons, that sort of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I also think human stories, we have impacts on when we tell our friends and family good and bad experiences. So yeah, it's not individual. Hey Rory, shall we bring you into this?
Sure.
Okay, this is a statement then a question. So low-income households and renters are consistently identified as facing the biggest barriers to the energy transition, but also standing to benefit the most from lower running costs. How can renters advocate for change to gas appliances, hot water, heating, stovetops, and more?
Well, I guess this question gets to a couple of things. The split incentive, which we've already mentioned, is one of the issues here, which is that in a rental setting, the renter is the one that would benefit the most from reduced energy costs, for example, but the landlord is the one that would have to make the investment. And that in itself is a tough nut to crack. And there's actually something else going on here, which is also a power imbalance when it comes to what renters can advocate for in their own rental home. The relationship between a renter and their landlord is one of power imbalance. It's a financial relationship. It's also a relationship based on the supply of housing, the provision of housing to someone. And what we hear at VCOS from our member organisations in the community sector is that most renters are afraid of essentially being noticed by their landlord because they're more afraid of losing their security of tenure, being evicted, or of having a rent increase than they are to, have to deal with things like repairs, stand up for that and say, I have something that's broken here, I need it replaced. They'd much rather be not noticed than even get that fixed. So when you move beyond that and you're talking about advocating for appliances to be changed, for the landlord to make a big investment in the property, I think it's worth first up acknowledging that that's quite difficult for most people living in a rental to take that step. And so I think that's, firstly, in answering that, I have to put my policy hat on, as Jay did, and say this is the reason we have things like minimum standards, to ensure that there are rules in place to set a base level of property quality that renters get to live in, because we've decided as a society that we have this level of quality that we want everyone to enjoy. And it's great that in Victoria now that will include efficient electric heating and hot water heating. So that's good already. I think it can go further, as we've kind of already touched on, and I think there's a lot of different policy levers that need to be pulled in the renters' rights part of that, because having the good rules in place is one thing, actually getting them enforced and having compliance is a tricky one. And much of the current onus sits with renters themselves to stand up for themselves and go through things like VCAT, to make sure that minimum standards are properly applied in their rental properties. And that's a very daunting prospect for anyone, let alone someone who's on a low income, who is really just wanting to keep a roof over their head. So I think folks like ourselves advocating for better rules and regulations is one thing. Of course, the renter in the question could get involved in advocacy themselves as well and, get organising. But bringing it back to what they can do in terms of advocating for themselves and their own property, setting all of that aside, I think it is, in an ideal world, I think they'd be able to have a dialogue with their landlord and say, look, there are things in place that, as Jay mentioned before, actually make upgrading appliances a lot cheaper, grants and rebates and discounts that make this quite a good prospect. And at the end of the day, you've got an improvement to a property that's probably going to increase the value of it. You're going to have a happy renter, which is much better for the stability of the lease as well. I think ideally people should be able to have that kind of conversation and that relationship, but of course fully acknowledging the structure that we exist within is not always that simple. So it's a tough one at times.
Good overview. And then the second question I have for you is, this submitter is a pensioner, and their question is, will I be required to update my appliances to electric in the future?
Great question. I'm assuming this is an owner-occupier situation rather than a renter. I'll go with that premise.
You go with that, yeah.
Yes. So the answer in terms of what is the policy setting at the moment is possibly. And not just yet. So there's new rules coming into place that say if you have a gas hot water system, there will be a point where there will be requirements to replace it with an electric alternative when it breaks down. Now, there's a bunch of exemptions to that, which actually mean you might not have to. And it sort of depends on your specific situation and what type of appliance you have. But as has been raised already, it's really just a regulation that requires a shift at that moment when it's actually the best time to do it, when it's broken down. And that's really all that's in place at the moment for owner-occupiers. Of course, the minimum standards for rentals go further than that. Now, of course, if advocates like ourselves got our way, you would need to replace more appliances in the future to get off gas. And I think the way things are going in terms of just the natural attrition of gas customers because of the price of it and because of these policy settings that are coming into place, we will have a situation where it is much more advantageous to get off gas in the long run. You know, reports like Jay's show that, but I think over time it will become quite an issue as fewer and fewer people are on the gas network, but still having to essentially fund the upkeep of it. It will be shared with fewer and fewer people. And so either through people's own, necessity of having to get lower bills, there will be quite a pressure to eventually get off gas. And I just, what we do every day is really advocate for making that as easy as possible for people and have lower upfront costs so that this can be something that everyone can do with as little worry as possible, because it really does benefit everyone in the long run.
Thank you for that overview. My final question for you is kind of the inverse of this first question I gave you, and it's how can investors support the transition for renters cost effectively?
Yeah, great question. And it's kind of already been touched on. I think, as Jay said, these things don't have to happen all at once. If you're someone who has an investment property that has a bunch of gas appliances in it, it's not a matter of, tomorrow you have to go out and replace all the appliances with electric ones. If you do want to do that, by all means. But really, it's about knowing the property, knowing what the appliances are that are in there, how old they are, because that point of when they stop working is really the best time to do it. Because if there is a higher upfront cost, the only difference that you're paying is the gap between, replacing like for like and the new appliance. If you want to make the decision to replace it earlier, great, but it will probably be a higher cost at the time, if that makes sense. So I think having a plan, not letting things just sort of suddenly happen overnight and you have to replace something quickly without knowing where to go or what to buy, I think is one part of that. But if it is a matter of a plan that you have to transition the property off gas, do it in an orderly fashion as appliances reach the end of their useful life. Installing things like ceiling insulation can be a big job, so properly researching that. But spreading the costs out, not doing it all at once, is the best way to do it. And as I kind of said before, I think it really is also in the landlord's interest at the end of the day, because you have a better quality property. It'll probably have a higher value and happier renters, which I'm always keen to see.
Okay, brilliant context there. Let's get to the health of it all. So I'll involve you, Schwung. And so this question is a statement, then a question. So asthma and respiratory allergies to smoke, gas and diesel are disabling for affected individuals and costly to the health system. What does the evidence tell us about the health impacts of gas appliances inside our homes, and what are you seeing in your own patients?
Thanks for the question. Basically, combustion is deadly. Combustion kills. So whether that's a cigarette or exhaust from a combustion engine, or whether it's gas in your cooktop or coming out of your cooktop, or gas that you're using to heat your home, it all involves burning a fuel, and that inevitably involves generating toxic byproducts, and they kill. There hasn't been a direct analysis in terms of number of deaths, I think, of indoor gas, specifically in Australia, but there have been a number from the US and the EU. And if you extrapolate from the effects of gas appliances as it's been assessed in those places, and I think humans are generally the same in Europe and Australia and the US, the estimates, and these are probably low ball, 1,500 to 2,500 deaths a year can be attributed to indoor gas appliances. So comparable to the road toll. And this is for something that we have an alternative to. You can heat your home and cook your food without using any gas. The technology is very well established. Beyond that, we have specific Australian impact data, particularly in relation to asthma. And it's estimated that about 12% of our childhood asthma burden can be attributed solely to the exposure of our kids to indoor gas. And that translates to about 55,000 cases of childhood asthma. It's equivalent to being exposed to secondhand smoke. So we all intuitively understand that it would not be good for developing lungs to be exposed to a smoker in the household. Even if there is a smoker in the household, most parents would understand that it would be a good thing to go outside to smoke your cigarette rather than inside. Having an indoor gas burner generates an equivalent kind of impact in terms of toxic substance when you're looking at the population level risk of the development of this sort of thing. If you're looking at what actually is it in that's being generated, there's PM 2.5, so there's particulate matter that's very small, so it gets right down to your smallest airways and then crosses over into your bloodstream, and then that goes all over your body. That has cardiovascular impacts, increases your risk of heart attack, stroke, long-term dementia, as well as cancer. There is benzene, which is a carcinogen, related especially to leukemia and other blood-related cancers. There was a study from America that looked at benzene exposure from gas cooktops that actually had the alarming finding that there is a little bit of leakage even when the gas burner is off. And so you actually had a significant exposure for the 23 hours of the day that you're connected to the gas network, the reticulated network. Even when you're switched off, it's not necessarily a completely airtight switch. So you can get a low level leak into your house, and so you're getting exposed to benzene just by merely being connected to it. If you think about it in terms of, no one would want to hook up their kitchen to the tailpipe of their car. No one would want to pipe exhaust directly into your house. That functionally is what you are doing when you're turning on a gas cooktop. You're combusting the gas there. All of that, even with a range hood, you will get leakage of that stuff out into the room. So that's basically the exposure that you're having, and the evidence is there that it is having an impact on those health conditions. So that's a short answer. I mean, we could go on go into papers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you notice any of those impacts in your own patients?
Yeah. So that's. It's that kind of exposure is a cumulative exposure over a lifetime. So it's kind of falls into the same category as if someone who smokes comes into my clinic, I'll encourage them to stop smoking, and really congratulate them when they make that really hard step of doing so, because it is very difficult. But when they do so, it's not necessarily that you'll notice an overnight change. It's over your life. You have dramatically decreased your risk of developing lung cancer, say 10, 20 years' time. So it's not necessarily an overnight shift that you will see if you go from gas to electricity. And amongst the cohort of patients I see, a lot of people, it's a bit of a two-edged sword talking about this, because a lot of the patients I see won't really have the capacity, for all of the reasons that we've already talked about, to make that switch off their own bat without these policy changes that are so needed. So you don't want to give them the scare story and then not giving them the ability to get off that. But certainly within my broader cohort of practitioners, where I've had some of my colleagues say that they have had cases where a family switched from gas to electric, and the child in that household, their asthma is suddenly much better controlled. So you certainly have anecdotal evidence of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think the stats that you've shown, like, it does highlight that this conversation isn't one only about energy and economics. Like, it's the health of Australians and our kids.
Absolutely.
My second question for you is, how can we get rid of home wood fires as well as gas so that we have clean air to breathe inside and outside our homes? Big question for you.
How? That's a tricky one. That really is appropriate for you. You can't ask me because wood fires are kind of a lot of people seem to place wood fires in a different category too, because there's a lot of there's something very primal about having a fire, and there's a big emotional connection that people have to using wood fires to heat their homes in winter. But I come back to, unfortunately, combustion kills. And that applies to wood fires as well. I think across the country, the impact might not be as much cumulatively, just because a lot of us live in cities, and a lot of people in cities don't have wood fire heating. But there are papers out there saying that, for instance, even in Sydney, there are some parts of Sydney where there are wood heaters in use. 200 to 300 deaths a year can be attributed to the pollution that comes from wood fire heating in Sydney. Similar studies in Canberra where there's a bit of a prevalence of wood fire heating. I think that, there was one paper that said the annual impact of, say, a winter's worth of wood fire heating in the Canberra region was comparable to the impact of the 2019-2020 bushfires in terms of air pollution. So it's not trivial. And even though we have a long connection with fire as a human species, and it's in many ways shaped our evolution and helped us survive and all of those things, we have different ways of heating ourselves now. And there'd be many practices from back in caveman times that we wouldn't still be doing it now, even though there might be a nostalgic reason for doing some of those things. So as to how I think particularly regionally, a lot of people do depend on wood fire heating. So I think the first thing is always supporting people to be able to heat their homes effectively and giving them the means to be able to do that. You can't just say take away a source of heating and not give them another option for doing that. So I think some people, I know Asthma Australia, for instance, one of their policy asks is that new builds not incorporate any wood heating, or that be banned from new builds, or that new wood fire installations be banned. That's one of Asthma Australia's recommendations. So it would be a combination of policy change and supporting people who are dependent on wood fire to keep warm during winter. But I'm not a policy expert, so that's obviously a very, very complex question there.
Well, there's people with policy hats in
right
the
here.
room, so I'm sure we can circle back to that. Brilliant answer there to all of you. I'm personally thankful in each of your answers you all referenced like 3 reports that you read. So I'm thankful you read those, so I didn't. So thank you. And how about we give them a round of applause for surviving the first portion. So whilst we're making the case for getting gas out of our homes, there's a proposal right now to bring a new gas import terminal into Port Phillip Bay. Community submissions are open, and GRNG are running a free online information session next Tuesday on how to have your say. Details are on our stall, but we'll now take a 10-minute break. So please visit the stalls, chat to our panelists, corner them, ask your questions, and then come back ready to ask anything that we haven't covered, and we'll open up for around 3 audience questions. So thank you. You may all be free. We're now going to open up for audience questions. This is your chance to ask something that we haven't covered tonight, or to dig deeper into something that came up before or during the break. We don't have heaps of time, so I want to ask that people focus on questions rather than statements, and to be respectful of everyone's time. If I think that a statement is going on a bit too long, I might just gently pull us back. But yes, if you have a question, please raise your hand now. We answered everything so great. Okay, Afrik?
I'm happy to start with that one because I think it's a really good question, because the answer you hope for in some ways is that there's absolutely no change, because the ideal kind of smooth transition to electrification is you upgrade from a gas to electric appliance. Your life is the same. It's nothing different. My anecdotal personal experience is I've been surprised by some of the benefits. So in my house, for example, we had what they call a gas instant hot water system, which is one of the most common types in Victoria. The system isn't actually instant. So you turn on the tap, water starts to flow, and it usually takes a minute or two for the hot water to heat up and come into the house. What I found when I switched to a heat pump hot water system, which has a storage tank, is the hot water is now just sitting there in the tank. So I turn on my tap, and all I have to do is wait for the water to flow out to that. So that's kind of an interesting, unexpected experience where now I get much faster hot water, and I guess I'm saving water as well. The other thing that I think is also important to recognise and sometimes forgotten about is when you switch from a gas heater to a reverse cycle air conditioner, which is the most efficient type of heating, you're also getting a cooling appliance. And so there's plenty of places, particularly in cooler states like Victoria and Tasmania, where people have not traditionally had air conditioners in their home. And so when you switch to a heat pump, reverse cycle air conditioner, now you can have cooling in summer. So I think that's a nice benefit.
Add to it, Kat. Go.
I think that switch from heating is really interesting, especially if you've got underfloor ducted gas heating, and so it's the air, instead of coming up from the floor, it's coming from either a ceiling grill or from the split system units that are on the wall. So that sort of is a difference. It's also with the ducted gas heating, if you were actually to crawl under your floor and have a look, you'd probably find that all the silver duct, the silver flex duct, is probably got a few holes in it. And it's why is the floor so warm? It's because you're wasting heaps of energy. And if you looked inside the ducts, unfortunately, you'd probably find a lot of dust and pet hair and mould and stuff like that. And this is something that I learnt from reading Tim Forsey's My Efficient Electric Home Handbook, which is a really good book. It's very, very approachable, very readable, because he does go and crawl under people's floors, and he's no one ever puts the filters back. And so if you go under there, all the air that's coming to your house is flowing through this as well. So, and I mean, that would be the case too if you had a similar problem in your ceiling. It's a bit harder for those things to get up there, but you might have gross ducts.
Do you recommend people climb under their homes?
I definitely do. If you like big spiders and mice and stuff like that.
And you might find Tim Forsey down there.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Hello, Nancy. There's a microphone coming. We'll still use the microphone, though. We feel very happy with microphones.
Okay. Well, it sounds very much like gas is being reduced overall. Why have we got the crazy idea of Viva? Viva's plan with
I'll just explain. So this is a gas import terminal. So why are we talking about import terminals?
I'll grab that one as well. It's opportunism. So we've been looking at, so there's Viva and there's Viva's kind of still maybe in the works. Who knows whether they'll build it, but I think they're allowed to. And now we've got Vopak, which is in a different part of the bay, but it still wants to do that. That to build it is $400 million. To rent the ship that takes the liquefied natural gas off the ship, turns it back into gas and puts it in the network. Over 10 years, that's another $400 million. All that money, plus the profit that's made off that, ends up on everyone's gas bill. And what they're doing is betting on government panicking and freaking out when our gas use is dropping very quickly in Victoria, because a government is terrified of running out. And so these companies want to step in and go, we're here to save the day, and it's going to cost you a bomb. And it's going to cost all of us a bomb. So I think it's their businesses, they exist to make profit. And if we have a disordered transition where we don't have the supports we need and we don't have the clear signals that we need, like they're betting on that. And yeah. So, and they're stupid ideas.
Does anyone want to add?
Yeah. Just in terms of what the bet is, when I first sort of started getting involved in climate advocacy, a lot of people talked about gas as a transition fuel between, coal and then renewables. And over time, it really sort of shifted to say, as the reality of renewables came about, and it actually was clear that, as we sort of touched on at the start, they can be quite abundant for most of the day, most of the year, and power the grid quite well. It shifted to, okay, well, it's a peaking fuel. It's for when there's the sun is not shining and the wind's not blowing. And I think from what I see now, that's reduced down to the few days of the year in the middle of winter when there's absolutely no sun and for some reason the wind's not blowing at all anywhere in the state. And basically the use case for gas in the future, because of electrification's momentum, is in gas power generation. And if people are expected to invest in a gas power plant for a couple of days' use in the year, it just doesn't make sense. Maybe data centers might change that, but I hope not. But the equation doesn't really work out. And unfortunately, when these sort of decisions happen, as Kat said, the way things are set up now, it ends up on people's gas bills. So we pay.
Do you want to add on? Okay. Does anyone else have a question? Oh, yay, people. Your choice. Sorry, Alex.
Hi. Yes, this is on. I have some solar panels, which is good, and I'm thinking of getting a battery and transitioning my gas appliances over. But if there's a power outage, like there often is in Geelong, and I have a battery, can I still use my appliances, or do I still not have power when the power goes out? It may be a stupid question, but I just don't know.
No stupid questions to begin with.
I can answer this, and my understanding is the answer is yes if the system's set up correctly. So you can have a battery system set up to be, there's a term that's set in my mind, but essentially able to provide backup power, and that can mean that your circuit sort of switch to using the solar and battery system if the power goes out. The other thing to note is that you can get different sizes of batteries, and what's sort of happened since the federal rebates have come in is that battery sizes have tended towards the larger size. So if you were to get what's kind of the average size battery today, which is somewhere between 20 and 30 kilowatt hours, I would say that's more than enough for most people to run their appliances for at least a day. So yeah, short answer is yes, that can be a big boost to your resilience if you're as long as you're not in a very extended power outage. Yeah.
And it's a good argument for big batteries as well, neighbourhood batteries and shared microgrids, basically grid resilience. I think.
Alex, is your question a quick one?
Well, it depends on Sung's answer. I have heard some people express concern about certain health impacts from induction cooktops. More specifically, people that have said something about it affecting pacemakers, for example. Is that true? And also, are there any other possible health impacts related to like electromagnetic fields and that sort of stuff?
Thank you for the question. That certainly has been posed to some of our members. So there's been a fair amount of internal discussion as to the theoretical risk of the induction cooktop on pacemakers. Certainly, a very strong magnetic field can interfere with pacemaker functions. That's the reason why you have to check carefully before you go through an MRI machine, say, if you have a pacemaker. But the cardiologists in our group basically had the consensus that in terms of the induction cooktop and the size of that magnetic field, it would almost certainly have no impact on your pacemaker, unless you actually lay down on top of the cooktop and put the pacemaker right next to it. It certainly shouldn't impact it just in terms of everyday use. I don't believe there actually have even been any case reports of any of this happening. It's purely a theoretical thing that's been identified, and in like induction cooktops have been used for a long time in, say, certain parts of Europe as well, and pacemakers as well, and it hasn't arisen as an issue. So it's not something I'm worried about. You might advise someone with a pacemaker, keep your pacemaker at least an arm's length distance, but you probably want to anyway if you're cooking something very hot. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's a good question, and it's good that people are aware of safety in that regard.
Good answer. So don't be laying on induction cooktops. Something to take away for tonight. Before we close out, I want to give our panellists a chance to speak to each other rather than just to me. We've heard a lot about the barriers, the evidence, and the policy landscape, and I want to end on something a bit more forward-looking. With gas and electrification in mind, what would make the biggest difference for Geelong households right now? Great question, Lauren. Yeah. Anyone brave enough to start? Yes, Kat, do it.
I pre-thought of an answer, so...
Thank you so much, Kat.
I think that, Geelong is an ideal place to really play to your strengths. Geelong already has an identity as a real stronghold of manufacturing and that sort of thing. You've got amazing groups like you guys and Real Deal Geelong who are really looking to, build the economy here and opportunities for everyone. And I think to, become a real hotbed of electrification, that's really good for households and businesses. It's really good for people doing the installations as well, and to have that expertise growing here and to just make it a real ecosystem. And I think it's, as part of that, it's useful to look at what's happening in Gippsland as well, and I think that Gippsland should be looking at what's happening here as well. So Gippsland have an annual New Energy Conference, and it brings in everyone. And it's people are learning about stuff together, about what sorts of new energy we'd like to have here. They're obviously coming from a different background because they've been where the power comes from. And that they've got that kind of proud history and skills base, as well as the legacy of giant holes in the ground and that sort of stuff. And so I think think about what it can mean for Geelong and just go, what are our strengths? Let's play to those, and make it good for everyone.
I'll jump in. It's what Kat said is great. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add other than to say, when we think of a just transition and a fair transition, this is the sort of vision that we like to put, that it does have this amazing potential, if done well and equitable and whatnot, to lift people up, to improve people's quality of life, to improve communal living as well, you know, to improve the bonds of community. And I think, yeah, communities like Geelong are great places to put that into action, and just demonstrate the positives that could come from an energy transition done in a fair and equitable manner, because that's what we have to do.
Yeah, look, I think that's a great answer. So I don't know if I'm adding that much to it, but I would say, look, the interesting thing is about, we always have to remember about Victoria, is that Victoria has actually quite an unusual sort of household energy profile. We actually use a lot more gas in our households than other parts of Australia. And so it's quite interesting to me to think about, you know, how can that electrification transition play out in a very gas-heavy state in our smaller cities and places like Geelong, where, you know, as panellists have talked about, you know, in many ways we have more of an ability to build community alliances and to sort of, you know, become a bit of a test bed for electrification. So, you know, I would love to see Geelong being a bit of a regional leader in Victoria on electrification. Like, can we get a case study where we, you know, see, you know, look how far we've come in electrifying, you know, the city and its suburbs, and can that be an example for other places like Melbourne? Because, yeah, I think, you know, obviously a lot of the organisations that I'm sure people in this room are involved are you know, there and ready to support that journey. So, yeah, I think forge ahead.
Like I said before, I'm not a politician or a policy expert, but I mean, maybe it's a question for all of us really, is how do we achieve this on the plane of it being a political question? Because it's common sense, it will benefit everyone. Certainly 99% of us, it will benefit. And maybe there's a bit of a hint there as to why it hasn't happened yet. And so maybe it's about how do we, in the face of vested interests and lots of money being behind a particular approach to energy and development, how do the rest of us try to get our community, our society functioning in a different way? We have a democracy theoretically, we vote in elections, but obviously money does play a big factor in the outcome of those things. But I think we do live in a society where we can, if we make the effort, can make our voices count. And that's by all of the conversations that we have at every level in the clubs that we participate in, schools, our workplaces. There's decision making and democracy happening at every level in terms of the choices that each of these organisations make. And if we advocate for the better option at each of those levels, I guess that's all we can do. So yeah, I just encourage everyone not to lose hope when you're looking at you know, big things like the gas import terminal and all this work that people are doing, and yet the government still gives it the tick and saying yes, it can go ahead. But the conversations, it comes back to what Kat was saying in terms of what difference does it make if I convert my own household versus it's not just the physical thing that you're doing, it's the impact of the example that you're giving by doing that. And by choosing to talk about this instead of another thing that, you know, on any given day, that tends to can have a snowball effect in terms of what people are focused on.
That was good. Yeah, I really appreciate your answers tonight, and I think probably like the articulate thing is, lead by example, and that comes from our individual lives, where we can lead by example in our conversations, our households, our community lives and that kind of stuff, but we can also lead as a community front and perhaps become that case study, because there is opportunities here. We do have the infrastructure and the ability and the possibility to create change. It's just, taking that first step. That was just my little rant. But we've heard tonight that the transition off gas is not only necessary, it's possible, and it's already underway. The question is whether it happens in a way that's fair, fast enough, and something our community has a real say in. And I think that last part is up to all of us. And I appreciate that you've all come out tonight to be part of this discussion and this conversation. Oh, yes, a pat on the back through clapping. Very nice. I want to thank all of our panellists for their time, and in recognition of your dedication tonight, we have some peace lilies for you to take home. They're very pretty. Good luck with getting them home if you're going via public transport, but I'm sure you'll do well. I want to thank you also to the Geelong Regional Library Corporation for hosting us in this amazing space. Thank you so much. You've been absolutely gracious, and I really appreciate it. Yay! Yay to the spontaneous clapping, everyone. I want to also thank you to all of our GR&G volleys for showing up tonight, and our photographer, Afrik, who I've seen with her camera on the side there. And thank you finally to all of you for showing up, even though it was raining and cold and you could have been in bed by now. I appreciate you being here. As we end tonight looking towards a better future, I have 3 things I'd love you to take away and consider as actions. Locally, if you're thinking about electrifying your home and don't know where to start, either visit the Geelong Sustainability Stall tonight, Corner Carina, that one over there, or check out the Electric Homes program. They're amazing support. They'll take you through it, and they have some cool checklists on how to electrify your homes. In our regional sense, as I mentioned before, community submissions are now open for the proposed Vopak gas import terminal in Port Phillip Bay. As the panellists have mentioned, be hopeful, be a voice of change. Community opposition is so incredibly important, and I understand that it can be a bit disheartening to always have to submit. Obviously, I don't want this in my backyard, but it is really important, and this action and this community action with Viva was so impactful that we were able to delay it for years. And in the environmental world, sometimes you don't get a clear-cut win. Our win is through making it more unviable and pushing it back. And so I think that's important to consider. And we're hosting an information session next Tuesday online to help with submissions and also just outline the proposal, which our experts have read. And then federally, we've talked a lot about policy tonight. Consider putting your policy hats on and joining Renew Australia for All, or GR&G. There's lots of stuff that Renew Australia for All or even Real Deal Geelong are campaigning on. Have a look at it, get your hands dirty, all of that kind of stuff, and remain active. I hope tonight gave you something useful to take home, even if it's not lying on inductive stoves. That will be a great win. Thanks again, and safe travels to everyone.